I used to be the kind of person who checked every lock 3 times before going to bed. Front door, back door, windows, all of them. It made me feel safe. But that was before last Tuesday. Before I discovered what the man living next door had secretly been doing for 6 months. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that this could happen to anyone. I live in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where people still wave when they pass by, and children ride their bikes until the streetlights flicker on. I'm a 52-year-old divorced nurse, living alone in a small 2-bedroom house. Peaceful, predictable, safe, or at least, I thought it was. My neighbor, a man I'll call Derek, moved in last spring. Mid-40s, quiet, polite, in a distant way. We'd exchange small talk while collecting mail, nothing more. He said he worked from home with computers, which explained why his blinds were always closed and why I rarely saw him outside. At the time, nothing about him felt wrong, just private. Invisible, even. Looking back now, I realized that invisibility was the most dangerous thing about him. Last Tuesday morning, I was rushing from my shift at the hospital where I've worked for over 20 years. I grabbed my coffee, locked the door, and headed to my car only to remember I'd forgotten my ID badge. Annoyed, I went back inside. That's when I noticed something small, but deeply unsettling. My bedroom curtain was slightly open. I never leave it open, not even a crack. A cold shiver crawled up my spine, but I convinced myself I must have been careless the night before. I closed it tightly and left, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling sitting in my chest. That night I returned home around 7, exhausted. I made a simple dinner, watched television, and tried to relax, but the house felt different, too quiet, like the air itself was waiting. Around 10:30, while brushing my teeth, I saw a tiny red dot glowing on my bathroom mirror. At first I thought it was a reflection from outside, but then it moved, slowly, deliberately, and then it vanished. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I switched off the light and stood frozen in the darkness, barely breathing. After what felt like forever, the red dot appeared again, this time on the wall opposite the window. It trembled slightly, then steadied, like someone adjusting their aim. That's when the realization hit me with full force. It wasn't inside the house. It was coming from outside, from someone watching. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called the police. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes, their presence the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. I explained everything: the curtain, the red dot, the feeling that someone had been observing me. One officer stayed with me while the other went outside to search the area. Minutes passed in suffocating silence until the officer outside radioed back. His voice sounded tense. He said they needed me to come out front. From my yard I could see directly into Derek's bedroom window, about 30 feet away from mine. When the officers shined their flashlights inside, my stomach dropped. There, standing in the darkness of his room, was a camera mounted on a tripod pointed straight at my house, straight at my bedroom window. It looked like it had been there for a long time. They knocked on his door. No response. They knocked again, louder this time, announcing themselves as police. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. Derek stood there, pale and trembling, his eyes wide with panic. Not the panic of someone surprised, but of someone who had just been caught doing something unspeakable. Even from across the yard, I could see it on his face. And in that moment, I realized something far worse than being watched once. I had been watched for a very, very long time. The officers went inside his house while I stayed outside, shaking uncontrollably, wrapped in a rough gray blanket one of them had placed around my shoulders. The night air felt colder than it should have, biting through the fabric and straight into my bones. Every second dragged by like an hour. I kept staring at his dark windows, imagining him watching me from behind them all this time. After about 20 minutes, the front door finally opened. The officers stepped out, their faces grim, and asked me to come to the station to give a statement. Derek was handcuffed and taken away without saying a single word. He didn't look at me, not once. At the police station, they told me what they had found inside his house, and I felt my stomach twist so violently, I thought I might pass out. Derek had set up multiple cameras aimed directly at my bedroom, bathroom, and living room windows. Not just one camera, several. He had been recording me since the very week he moved in. 6 months of my life, stolen without my knowledge. Hundreds of hours of footage. Me changing clothes. Me stepping out of the shower. Me wandering around late at night in my pajamas, believing I was completely alone. Every private moment. Captured. But that wasn't the worst part. On his computer, officers discovered a folder labeled with my name. Inside were thousands of screenshots, carefully organized by date, time, and what I was doing. Some were zoomed in so closely they made my skin crawl. Alongside the images were detailed notes, my daily schedule, the exact time I left for work, when I returned home, when my lights turned off at night. He knew patterns about my life that even I hadn't noticed. It was like someone had been studying me, not as a neighbor, but as prey. Then they told me something that made the room spin. Evidence showed he had actually been inside my house, twice. The forensic team concluded he must have copied my key somehow. He hadn't stolen anything obvious. Instead, he had moved small items, just enough to prove he'd been there. Things I might have dismissed as my own forgetfulness. He photographed my mail, my prescription bottles, even the inside of my underwear drawer. The idea that a stranger had stood in my bedroom touching my things while I was away, or possibly even while I slept, made me feel sick in a way I can't describe. The lead detective said Derek had been building what they called a dossier, an obsession, a complete profile of my life. On his computer, they also found searches about how to disable home alarm systems, how to enter houses quietly, and the safest times to approach someone when they were alone. The detective spoke gently, but his words felt like knives. He said they believed I had called them just in time. Derek's recent search history suggested he was preparing to escalate, to do something far worse than watch. Since that night, I haven't slept in my bedroom. I can't. Every shadow feels like eyes. Every creak of the house sounds like footsteps that don't belong to me. Because once you learn that someone has been watching you for months, truly watching, you never feel alone again. Even in an empty room, it feels like the darkness is still observing, still waiting for the moment you let your guard down. Right now, I'm staying at my sister's house 2 towns away. I couldn't remain in my own home, not after what I learned. The house has already been put on the market because I can't even drive down that street without nausea rising in my throat. My hands start shaking before I even turn the corner. Derek is still in jail awaiting trial, but his lawyer is pushing hard to have him released on bail. The prosecutor warned me that I will almost certainly have to testify in court, which means seeing him again, sitting in the same room, breathing the same air as the man who spent half a year studying my life like I was some kind of experiment. Every night, I lie awake, replaying those 6 months in my mind, all the ordinary moments that were never actually private. I remember standing at my bedroom window sometimes, gazing up at the stars, feeling calm, safe, completely alone in the world. I used to love those quiet moments. Now they make my skin crawl, because I know the truth. I was never alone, not once. But the part that truly shattered me came later. Derek's landlord told police this wasn't his first time doing something like this. He had lived in 2 other neighborhoods before ours, and both times he was quietly asked to leave after women reported feeling uneasy around him. No one could prove anything back then, so no charges were filed. No warnings were issued. He simply packed up, moved somewhere new, and started over until he chose me. The thought that this could have been stopped, that someone could have said something, fills me with a kind of anger I don't know what to do with. I'm telling this story because people need to understand how easily something like this can happen. Trust that strange feeling in your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Close your curtains completely. Buy ones no one can see through. Pay attention to odd reflections, faint lights, anything that doesn't belong. A nice neighborhood doesn't mean you're safe. I believe that lie. And now I'll never feel truly secure again, not in any house, not in any room, not even in my own skin. I'm a 911 dispatcher in Portland, Maine, and I've been doing this job for 12 years. In that time, I thought I had heard every kind of nightmare a human voice could carry through a phone line. Domestic violence, overdoses, heart attacks, horrific crashes. You learn to stay calm, no matter what, to become a steady voice for people on the worst day of their lives. But what happened last Friday night is something I know I will carry with me forever, no matter how many years pass. The call came in at exactly 11:47 p.m. At first, it seemed like any other late-night emergency, just another flashing line on the console, another stranger in crisis waiting for help. I answered with the usual script, calm and professional. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Not dead air, breathing. Slow, shaky breathing, like someone trying very hard not to make a sound. Then, in a whisper so faint, I almost thought I imagined it, a woman spoke, and the fear in her voice made every hair on my arms stand straight up. A woman's voice, so faint it was almost swallowed by silence, whispered that she needed help. She gave an address in a quiet residential area near the waterfront, her words trembling like she was afraid even to speak. Then she said something that sent a cold shock through my entire body. "He's in the house. He's not supposed to be here. He's dead." Who? Who? I forced myself to stay calm, slipping into the steady tone dispatchers are trained to use. Even though my hands had started shaking so badly, I had to grip the desk. I asked her who was in the house. There was a long pause, followed by a broken whisper. "My husband." Another pause. Then, even quieter. "But he died 3 weeks ago. I buried him. He's downstairs right now. I can hear him." My first instinct was that this was a mental health crisis, possibly grief-induced psychosis. I had handled similar calls before, people unable to accept a sudden loss, their minds filling the silence with familiar sounds. I dispatched officers immediately, while keeping her on the line, speaking gently, trying to anchor her to reality. "Can you tell me exactly what you're hearing?" I asked. "Footsteps," she whispered. "He's walking around the kitchen. The floor creaks in that one spot near the sink. It always did. He used to stand there while doing the dishes." Her breathing became uneven, shallow. "I can hear the refrigerator opening and closing, and he's humming." Her voice cracked. "That song he always hummed, Blue Moon." As she spoke, I could hear faint sounds through the phone, not clear, not distinct, but enough to make my stomach tighten. A dull thump, a soft creak. It could have been anything, or nothing. Her breathing grew faster, edging toward full panic. I asked her name. "Margaret," she said. "Margaret Steiner. Please, you have to believe me. I'm not crazy. I know how this sounds, but he's here. My husband died of a heart attack on January 2nd. We had a funeral. I watched them lower his coffin into the ground." Her voice dissolved into quiet sobbing. The officers were only 3 minutes away now. I kept talking, keeping her focused, keeping her upstairs, and away from whatever was making those sounds below. "Margaret, listen to me," I said softly. "Stay where you are. Do not go downstairs. Help is almost there." There was a long silence. Then, barely audible, she whispered something that made my skin prickle with dread. He stopped humming. A second passed. "I think he knows I called." Then I heard it, too faint but unmistakable through the open line. Slow footsteps on wooden stairs. Each step produced a long, aching creak, like the house itself was groaning under the weight. The sound was getting closer. Margaret's breathing suddenly stopped, as if she were afraid even the air moving in her lungs might give her away. "He's coming upstairs," she whispered, her voice barely existing. I asked if her bedroom door had a lock. She said yes. I told her to lock it immediately. I heard frantic movement, fabric rustling, then a sharp metallic click. After that, nothing. Just silence so thick it felt suffocating, like the entire world had paused to listen. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the doorknob on her side began to rattle. It started gently, almost testing, then harder, faster, twisting back and forth, as if someone was trying to force it open, without making too much noise. Margaret let out a piercing scream that cut through the phone like glass. I told her the officers were arriving, that they were at her front door right now, even as my own voice threatened to shake. Through the line I heard shouting police announcing themselves, ordering whoever was inside to open the door. No response. Then a deafening crash as wood splintered, more shouting, heavy footsteps, and suddenly, silence again. "Margaret?" I said, my throat tight. "Margaret, are you there?" Instead of her voice, a man's voice came through, firm, controlled. "This is Officer Reyes. We've secured the residence." Relief hit me so hard, I nearly sagged in my chair. I asked if she was okay, what had happened. There was a pause on the line, just long enough to feel wrong. "We need detectives here," he said quietly. "Now. And tell them to bring everything they've got." His tone wasn't relief. It wasn't routine. It was something darker, something shaken. Technically, that should have been the end of my involvement. Dispatchers take the call, send help, and move on to the next crisis. We're not supposed to know the aftermath. But the next day, Officer Reyes called me on his personal phone. He said I deserved to know because my instructions had probably saved Margaret's life. There really had been someone in that house. Not her husband. Not anything supernatural. Just something far more disturbing. A man had been living in the crawl space beneath the first floor for at least a week, possibly longer. He had been hiding there, completely undetected, emerging only at night, while Margaret slept upstairs. He ate her food, used her bathroom, and moved silently through her home while she dreamed, never realizing she wasn't alone. The officers found a sleeping bag, piles of empty food containers, and tools. He had even carved out a section of the crawl space directly beneath the kitchen, creating a hidden opening that allowed him to listen and wait. Every sound she heard that night, the footsteps, the refrigerator, the humming, hadn't come from a ghost at all. It had come from a stranger standing in her kitchen, in the dark, just below her bedroom. But the detail that still wakes me up in the middle of the night, the one that refuses to leave my mind, is what the officers found when they finally caught him. The man hiding in Margaret's house wasn't just trespassing. He was wearing her dead husband's clothes. A thick sweater, worn pants, even the man's shoes, all taken from the donation bags Margaret had packed after the funeral. The bags had been left in a storage area, waiting to be picked up. Somehow, he had found them and decided to become the man who used to live there. Investigators later said it looked like he had been studying the husband, memorizing details about him, not just how he dressed, but how he moved, where he stood, what he did at certain times of day. In the crawl space, they found a journal filled with handwritten notes, page after page describing the family's routines, habits, and private moments. What time the husband used to leave for work, when Margaret went to bed, which lights stayed on overnight. It read less like notes and more like preparation. When questioned, the man claimed he was simply homeless and had been looking for a place to stay, just a desperate person seeking shelter. But nothing about the evidence supported that story. Investigators uncovered footage from a neighbor's security camera showing him approaching and entering the house, multiple times over several weeks, long before the husband had even died. He hadn't stumbled upon the home by accident. He had been watching them for months, learning everything he needed to know. Margaret later told detectives that, in the days leading up to the call, she had started noticing small, unsettling changes. Food disappearing faster than it should have, chairs slightly out of place, doors she was certain she'd closed, standing ajar, and a strange smell drifting through the house, something stale and unfamiliar, like damp earth mixed with sweat. She blamed it on grief, on exhaustion, on the crushing loneliness after losing her husband. She thought she was imagining things, that her mind was breaking under the weight of loss. But she wasn't losing her mind. She was sharing her home with a stranger. The man is now in custody, undergoing psychiatric evaluation, while authorities try to determine whether he has done this before, whether there are other houses, other families, other victims, who never realized someone had been living just inches away from them. Margaret has moved in with her daughter and put the house up for sale. She refuses to go back, not even to collect the rest of her belongings, because some places don't feel empty once the danger is gone. Sometimes, even when the house is quiet, it still feels like something is breathing inside the walls. Officer Reyes told me something I wish I had never heard. He said that if Margaret hadn't made that call when she did, they believed the man was preparing to confront her face to face. Hidden inside the crawl space, officers found one of her own kitchen knives, not dropped, not forgotten, but carefully placed within reach, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to use it. The thought of him lying in the darkness below her, listening to her walk across the floor above, gripping that knife, and deciding when to come out. It still makes my chest tight. I think about that call every single day. About how her instincts, not logic, not proof, just a deep, unshakable feeling, saved her life. She trusted that something was wrong, even when it sounded impossible, even when she feared people would think she had lost her mind. We spend our lives believing that home is the one place where nothing can reach us, never imagining that danger could already be inside, beneath the floors, inside the walls, watching, waiting for the moment we feel most safe. If there's one thing I learned from Margaret, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels off in your home, don't ignore it. Don't explain it away. Don't worry about sounding foolish. She almost didn't call because she was afraid no one would believe her. That hesitation could have cost her everything: her safety, her life, even her sanity. Sometimes the difference between survival and tragedy is simply believing yourself when no one else would. If there's one thing these stories teach us, it's that danger isn't always obvious. It doesn't always knock or announce itself. Sometimes it hides right under your nose, in your own home, in the forest, in the shadows where you least expect it. So stay alert, trust your instincts, lock your doors, watch your surroundings. Question every strange sound, every unexpected movement, because somewhere, someone, or something might be watching. And the question isn't if it's happening, it's when. If you thought these stories were chilling, remember, real life can be even more terrifying. Don't look away. Don't get too comfortable. And if you're brave enough, subscribe, because the next story waiting for you might be closer than you think.